Chapter 3. The next morning I woke up early. When I came downstairs, Dad was already in the kitchen, but there was no sign of Mam. She's going to stay in bed this morning, he told me. She hardly got any sleep last night at all. Just stay out of the way if you can. I did stay out of the way, but mostly because I was afraid of seeing her. I didn't know what I'd say if I did. But later in the morning, when I went upstairs to get David Copperfield, she came out of the bathroom, and when she saw me, she burst into tears. "For pity's sake, Danny," said Dad, running up the stairs. "I asked you not to cause any trouble." "I didn't," I said, holding my book in the air. "I only came upstairs for this." "Just go outside," he said, shaking his head. "Honestly, you never listen, do you?" I went into the garden and sat on the swing, trying to read my book. But I was getting nowhere with it. I was too angry to concentrate, so I went out on my bike instead. When I got home that night, the house was empty again. It was almost 6 o'clock and I was hungry. I opened the fridge and thought about making a sandwich, but before I could, there was a knock on the front door. "Danny," called a woman's voice. "Danny, it's Alice Kennedy. Are you in there?" I walked down the hallway and opened the door, but not all the way, and poked my head around it, like the old women do in the ads on television when the gas man comes to read the meter. Only he isn't the gas man at all. He's come to steal their pension money and beat them up. "Hello," I said. "Hi, Danny," she said, smiling. "Mam's not home," I said, because when women come around to the house, it was always to see Mam. "I know she's not," said Mrs. Kennedy. "Your dad phoned me. He thought you might be hungry." "Well, I didn't have any lunch," I admitted. "And here it is getting on for 6 o'clock," she said, reaching a hand through the gap between us. "We thought maybe you should come over to ours for some dinner." "Mam might be making dinner later," I said quietly, looking down at my shoes. "Your dad said they'd get themselves something on the way home. He asked if I'd let you eat with us, and I said of course," she said. "We'd be delighted with the company. Luke's setting another place even as we speak. But you better come with me now, because I don't want the steaks to burn." She practically dragged me from the house, and I pulled the door shut behind me. It felt nice having her hold my hand. Her skin was soft, and her hand was nearly as small as my own. But I didn't want Luke to see me walking through the door hand in hand with his mam, so I pulled mine loose before we went inside. "They call this summer," she said as we walked along, smiling at me as if neither of us had a care in the world. As if nothing bad was happening in my house, and Mr. Kennedy was still living in hers. "It's not like the summers we had when I was a girl, I can tell you that. There was a bit of heat in the sun back then." Inside I could smell the meat cooking beneath the grill. "We're back," she said cheerfully as we stepped into the kitchen. I looked around and could see Luke sitting at the table, staring at me as if he wasn't sure why I was there at all. Benjamin Benson, Mrs. Kennedy's boyfriend, was standing by the cooker, stirring a pot, and he turned to smile at me. He was the biggest man I'd ever seen in my life. Practically a giant, with thick, snowy white hair and a bushy white beard. I always thought he looked like a polar bear. "Good evening, young Danny," said Mr. Benson, who spoke like someone from a different century. "Luckily, I bought an extra steak just in case we had company. Always be prepared, that's my motto. Were you ever a Boy Scout?" "No," I said. "Boy Scouts are gay," said Luke, and Mr. Benson turned to look at him and nodded. "I dare say some of them are," he said, "and some are sad, and some excitable, and some delirious. We're all prone to different natures. I hope you like mushroom sauce, Danny." "I love it," I said. "Excellent," he cried, returning to his pot and stirring it some more. He lifted the wooden spoon and held it towards me. "Taste this and tell me whether it needs more salt. Remember, you can always add, but you can never take away, unlike a haircut. There you can always take more away, but you can never put any back on." I pressed my lips carefully to the tip of the spoon, worried that it might burn me. But it was just warm enough without being too hot, and it tasted delicious. "Very nice," I said. "Excellent," he replied. "Then I suggest you take a seat while I finish the meal. Alice, I hope you're not intending straining the potatoes yourself. That's no job for a woman. Sit down, pour yourself a glass of wine, and let me wait on you, for heaven's sake." I went over to the table where Luke was sitting, and he nodded at me. "All right," he said. "All right," I replied. "I didn't ask to come, you know," I told him under my breath. "She came over and got me." "I don't care," he said. "You think it matters to me who she invites for dinner? It's still my dad's house no matter what." "Danny?" asked Mrs. Kennedy, and I turned to look at her. I had the feeling she said my name a couple of times already and I hadn't heard her. What would you like to drink? I don't mind, I said. A glass of water. I think we can do better than that, don't you? A Coke, perhaps? Or an orange juice? She asked. Coke, I said quickly. Coke it is. Look, what do you want? Don't care, grunted Luke. Fine, said Mrs. Kenny, putting a glass of Coke on the table before me. Well, when you do care, you know where the fridge is and you can help yourself. Coke rots the teeth, said Mr. Benson, and I turned to look at him, worried that I'd disappointed him somehow, but he didn't look angry. But I can't start the day without a glass. It's an addiction. For some people it's coffee. He glared at Mrs. Kennedy when he said that, but she just laughed. For others it's cigarettes. He glared at her again, fiercely, and she laughed again and shook her head. I didn't know whether he was joking or not, but I supposed he must have been because she seemed to find it funny. But for me it's Coke. What about you, Luke? What are your addictions? Are we actually eating tonight? Asked Luke, glaring at him. Or just talking about it? A hungry man, said Mr. Benson, putting the steaks on the plates with some potatoes and vegetables. Then he poured the mushroom sauce over the meat and put them down in front of us. He sat opposite me while Luke and his mum faced each other at both ends. To the chef, said Mr. Benson, raising his glass. Oh, hold on, he added, as if he'd forgotten something. That's me. How rude. Mrs. Kennedy laughed and I giggled, but Luke looked like he was getting ready to kill someone, so I tried to wipe the smile off my face in case it turned out to be me. And what did you do today, Danny? Asked Mrs. Kennedy. Anything good? I went cycling, I told her. I can't cycle anymore, said Mr. Benson. I'm too big for bikes. I'd crush them. I used to love cycling when I was a girl, said Mrs. Kennedy. That's where I met David, actually, she added, on a cycling holiday in France. David's my father, said Luke, even though I knew. This is his house. Actually, this is my house, said Mrs. Kennedy, staring at her son. Mine and yours. Mr. Benson and I exchanged a glance, but said nothing. I tried to imagine what it would be like if Dad didn't live with us. Didn't even see us like Luke's dad almost never saw him. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't imagine our house without him. Or Mum. I looked down at my food, and even though I was starving, I found that I didn't have much of an appetite. What's wrong, Danny? Asked Mrs. Kennedy. Aren't you hungry? I looked down at my plate and shook my head. I started counting from 1 to 10 in my mind as quickly as I could, because I could feel tears behind my eyes and knew that I might start crying at any moment. You'll get ill if you don't eat, she said. Ah, look at him, shouted Luke triumphantly. He's crying. I'm not, I shouted as a tear hit the plate. I spun around and glared at him and could feel my chin trembling even as the tears came. I put my hand up to wipe them away. Look, be quiet, snapped Mrs. Kennedy. I'm sorry, I said. You have nothing to be sorry for, said Mrs. Kennedy, standing up. Nothing at all. Come into the living room with me for a minute. We're going to take a few quiet moments for ourselves. And look, I don't want to hear a peep out of you while we're gone. Is that understood? Luke nodded and looked a little sheepish as his mum took my hand and led me out of the kitchen. I glanced back as she shut the door behind us and saw him and Mr. Benson staring at each other. More mushroom sauce, Luke? Asked Mr. Benson.